thank you for joining me, Lara Quee, for the Legal Genie podcast. As a former corporate lawyer and APAC head of business development for an international law firm, my mission with this podcast is to provide you with insights into the careers and lives of movers and shakers in the legal industry. Mentors are hard to come by, so by listening to these conversations, I hope that you will gain some valuable insights that will help you move forward in your career and personal life. I ask my guests to share their advice and experience with you. I ask them also to share about their mindset. As an executive coach, I work one-on-one with lawyers to grow their practice and self-confidence. I also run mastermind groups and business development accelerators designed to bring like-minded people together to learn, grow, and support each other. If you would like to learn more, please connect with me on LinkedIn or through my website. The details are in the show notes. Please rate and review the Legal Genie podcast to help us reach more people who may find it helpful. So let's move on to this week's episode. I hope that you enjoy the conversation. Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Legal Genie podcast with me, your host, Lara Quee. Today, I'm excited to be in conversation with prominent Singapore lawyer Wong Siew Hong, partner at Eldon Law LLP in Singapore. Siew Hong read law at the National University of Singapore and was called to the bar in 1988. 3 years later, he heard the call of the wild and became a private investigator, chasing pirates who made and sold fake products, not just in Singapore, but all over Asia. And he says it was the greatest time of his life. But sadly, he was urged to give it up and get a respectable job. And so he returned to legal practice in 1993 and has been putting his nose to the grindstone ever since. As a partner at Eldon Law, Siew Hong's work against the fake goods trade continues to this day as he still practices intellectual property law whenever he can, specializing in particular in product security and anti-counterfeiting. He also practices criminal litigation work, and it was a chance encounter with an elderly lady in the then subordinate courts in 1989 that ignited his passion to fight for the underdog, the disadvantaged, and the disenfranchised. Siew Hong has appeared in over 30 capital cases in the High Court and scored a few wins, including the recent landmark Bay Chu Bu case in the Singapore Court of Appeal, which involved the acquittal of a Malaysian accused of drug trafficking. In his spare time, Siew Hong is an orchid enthusiast who has discovered a number of new orchid species, including one that's actually named after him, and he's an internationally accredited orchid judge. So Siew Hong, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lara. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's great to have you here and to see that you've had a very exciting career to date. Obviously, not the end of it. You will no doubt have a very glittering career in the future as well. But let's start right at the beginning. So tell me a little bit about your background and your childhood.
Well, I was born in 1962. So that would put me right at the age of 60, where I will be designated a senior citizen. But I still feel pretty young at heart and still very much a fool. So, yes, a bit as far as my background is concerned, I was born in Singapore, although I was made in Brunei because my father was working for Shell in Brunei. I'm the last of 5 children. My parents and siblings always assured me that I was what they call a one more time for old time's sake kid, because it's a 20-year difference between myself and my eldest brother and 16 between myself and the next sibling. So my mother managed to get herself onto a plane to get back into Singapore so that I could be born in Singapore and be a citizen of Singapore. So I grew up in a fairly rough neighborhood in Serangoon Road, now Little India, across the road from what is now Mustafa. And then I moved into public housing and pretty much lived all my life in Singapore.
So what about people in your family or people near you who were involved in the law? What inspired you to go into the law in the first place?
That's another good question. I really didn't know what to do with myself. I was studying to be an engineer and I went to junior college in a technical class. And those are the old days before you were allowed to use calculators, and we made a group buy of a Casio calculator. So when the calculator arrived, I unboxed it, I turned the thing around, examined it, and then I put my hand up and I asked the teacher, "Sir, how do I turn it on?" And the teacher looked at me very sadly and he says, "I think it is clear that you have no future as an engineer." And I took that to heart. And so some years later, when I was trying to find out what to do with my life, I went for a career talk, and the talk was given by Professor Walter Woon, who has since become a good friend. And he was my teacher. And I was listening to him, I was mesmerized. Oh, wow, you can be a lawyer and you can just bluff people so and get paid for it. So I think maybe I can be a lawyer too. That was the worst decision I ever made in my life, because then I went to law school and I thought that it was going to be easy, and found out that it was far from easy, and life has been hard as a lawyer. It's not just what you see on TV, standing up making some astounding propositions of law and then yes, upheld, and then you go and get your client acquitted, you win your case, and then you get paid a lot of money. But it's nothing like that. And I'm sure being a lawyer yourself, but no regrets. Seen a lot of things, I've experienced a lot of things in the course of my career, and been able to help a few people. And I'm quite pleased with where I am in life. I'm not rich, far from it, but yes, but I feel rich because there's been an opportunity to meet people, talk to people, and get to know people like yourself, to have a good time generally.
Well, it sounds like your career has been successful in that you say that you feel rich in terms of your life experience and in your spirit and in the good that you have done for the world generally.
Yes. Well, doctors get to save people and make a difference to them physically as a matter of routine, because you make people who are ill well. Lawyers, no. I'm always reminded of this joke where they say, what's the difference between a lawyer and a catfish? And they said, well, one is a bottom-feeding scum sucker and the other is a fish. So I try not to be the bottom-feeding scum sucker.
Oh dear. Yes, there are definitely people who don't think very much of lawyers. It's true. Yes. Anyway, let us get back to the excitement that you had as a private investigator. So firstly, tell us how on earth you ended up in that job and then the adventures that you had.
Well, I was working for Arthur Loke and Partners, which was then the affiliate for Baker McKenzie in Singapore. And so, of course, as a junior associate, at that time, they call you a legal assistant. They said, okay, go do this or go do that. And so, yes, sir. And so I was thrown into the IP department, which was basically to catch pirates selling fake goods along Orchard Road, wherever. And that's where I got to know the investigators and became quite chummy with them. And one of the first cases that I had to do was to raid this old man who was making counterfeit Brand's essence of chicken. He happened to be the caretaker in one of the cemeteries, and he lived in the cemetery. And so all these horrible stories that you have in your head about how he would make the Brand's essence of chicken in a cemetery. And I fell in love with the job because it turned out that what the man did was to have the beef extract or something like that. And then he would add it with water, MSG, and sugar to taste. And of course, Norse chicken stock. He would put it all in, and then he'll bottle it up nicely. And you have this approximate taste of essence of chicken, right? So basically what you do is you hold your nose, and then you drink the essence of chicken, because it's not exactly the best tasting thing in the world. And I was like saying, oh, wow, these guys are so clever. I fell in love with the job. And so it always amazed me to see what people can do in commercial counterfeiting. So after about 2 years or so in legal practice, I got a little bit annoyed with having to go to court. So I decided to leave, and the investigators asked me, say, why don't you come along hang out with us for a while? And so, then I went along with them, and it was the greatest time of my life. Okay, with fake watches, fake perfumes, fake everything, tobacco, alcohol, you name it. And there's always some kind of an angle in there where somebody would fake it. So, and Singapore being small that it was like ground zero in for all the fake product manufacturers. So I got to know many of the crooks and as well as the clients in the various industries. So yeah, it was a great time of my life. Until one fine day, I had to do a job overseas as an investigator, and I had to record the outcome of the investigations. And let's just say it was very exciting from a video game point of view, because it felt like a first-person shooter that it was for smuggling into China, was in the middle of the ocean, that the guys would throw the counterfeits overboard, and then fishing boats would come and pick them up, and then they'll run the gauntlet with the Chinese customs. And Chinese customs would be chasing after them with automatic cannons going away. So I thought it was a wonderful visual thing, right? Came back, I showed it to the ex-wife, and then I turned around and showed hyperventilating and said, no, okay, you are short-sighted, overweight, and flat-footed, right? You go back and get a normal job. Stop being a combination of Boy Scout and mugger. Right at that time, we were having dinner at my place with a Japanese client who was also looking at it, and then he said, "Wong San, I think your wife is right. Why don't you come back and start your own law firm, and then you take care of our work?" That was in 1992, right? And the client was Louis Vuitton. So I started it up, and well, life, like true love, never did run through. So the work didn't stabilize till something like 95 or so, because it's a big company. You do a little hole in the wall law firm. Nobody has ever heard of you. So that's where, just to make ends meet and also to get some legal experience, I volunteered to assist in capital assignment cases for people facing capital charges. I did a lot of those over the next couple of years. And so that's why my law practice is a little bit binary, in the sense that on the one hand, I do intellectual property work, which is a blend of very esoteric, because it's highly nuanced, whether it's trademarks, copyrights, patent infringement, and at the same time very blue. But then, of course, when you do anti-counterfeiting, you got to catch the bad guys, or how they pass things off as a real product. And that's where it interfaces with criminal work, because criminal work is really did you or did you not do it, and how did you do it? And so the investigative background and the training that I got from being an investigator was great, because I looked at the case something like a cop, because it's always about the evidence. It's once in a while you have something about the law, but it's always about the evidence, and where do I get the evidence? And so that's where it is. So, and I have, on the one hand, a very respectable litigation practice doing intellectual property. And on the other hand, it's very blue collar, dealing with murderers, drug traffickers, so on and so forth.
That's fascinating. And I like the way that you say that your experience as a private investigator showed you the importance of the evidence, following those trails, understanding actually the criminal world behind all of that.
That's right.
That enables you to have those insights to actually defend. And when it comes to the criminal defense work that you're doing now, because you've had that insight. So it's full circle in a way.
Yeah, it's a full circle. And the point there really is that you learn to listen, to say, look, it's the clients generally would lie through their teeth, right? But the issue here then is, listening for it and saying, could it be true? Where would you look? If you believe that it is true, then where would you look for it?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So thinking about the case that I mentioned right in the introduction, this elderly lady who then sort of spurred you on to represent the underdog, what was it about her case that produced this need for you to want to defend people like that in future?
Well, it wasn't a need, but, it's more seeing how the other side lives. Because, like I said, I grew up in a poor neighborhood. Out of the 40 in my class in primary school, I'm the only one who went to university. And I went on to a good secondary school, went on to junior college, went on to university, went into the army. The people whom I interacted with in the course of time, they all had a certain profile, because they were all educated. And it was when I went into the army that I realized that, hey, not at that point in time at any rate, maybe 1 in 100, 1 in 50 would make it to university. The other 49 or 99 would drop out along the way, that they get married, that they get into some technician's job, just very typical man on the street. So fast forward, this was probably 1989 when I was qualified, and then I was in court one afternoon. And this little old lady came up to me, and she was really old, probably 60s, 70s. I'm hitting 60 now. I don't feel that old, but at that time, it's like, oh my, ancient old lady. She was dragging a fully grown man behind her who obviously had Down syndrome. She spoke to me in Hokkien, and she asked me, says, look, how can I go? Where do I go? Because she's been issued some kind of a summons, and she was frightened, really frightened, because there's no interaction with the law coming into the courts. You're really worried. And so I just said, okay, no worries, auntie. I took up the paper, went to court. There was a mention, it was a 5-minute job. Right? Just stood up, say, look, this has been done, and done and dusted. 5 minutes. Right? No stress, no fuss, no muss. Then when she was so totally grateful, and it was then that I had two insights. One, the uneducated, the man in the street, they have no language. They don't have the facility of language that we have, so that they understand what's happening. And so they get terrified because there's a wall of words there, which is as real as any brick wall that you face. And it may be something simple, but to them, it is a brick wall. So that was the first insight I had. Then the second thing was that I asked, I said, oh, this is your son? And then she said, no, that's my grandson. And I said, oh, what do you do? And then she said, oh, I pick up cardboard to sell. And I said, well, why are you bringing your grandson to court? He says, no, his parents look after him. And then she said, no, they abandoned him. So I'm looking after him. And so I looked at her, and I felt a great well of pity coming up. And then I said, life must be very hard. And she looked at me and she said two words in Hokkien. And she just shrugged and she said, Mia ko, which literally means life is bitter. I never saw her again. But, those two words, it creates an entire universe because it's really difficult. And even today, especially today, when we live in Singapore, where we say, crazy rich Asians, blah, blah, blah. But there are those who have to scrape a living, right? You get the cleaners, the uncles and the aunties who barely make ends meet. They are the pioneer generation, the people on whose back we built Singapore and turned it into this glittering cityscape that we have. But they're not reaping the fruits of it. They're cleaning the hawker centers, they're washing our toilets. And every time I see them, somebody like that, it just brings up this bitterness inside of me, because we talk about social equity, looking after our elders, etc. And if we really do, as a society, look after and respect those who have made our very good life possible, then these folks should not be cleaning toilets, should not be cleaning tables and picking up after us in the hawker center. But they do. But that's life. And so, I do what I can for these people because I consider myself very fortunate.
Yeah, it sounds like you yourself had relatively humble beginnings. And so you're very aware of how you've been able to be mobile through society to get to a position as a lawyer, very respected, earning good money compared to your friends, as you mentioned, a whole generation. You were the only one who went to university.
Yes.
So there must have been something in you, though, at that stage. If the norm was not to go to university, to go straight into some job, or, well, obviously with national service, many young men just go straight into national service. But I'm thinking, what was it in you? Is there anything in your family, anything that helped you understand that going to university was the path that would get you to places?
Well, I didn't look at it that way. I was just being lazy because my mother, bless her soul, was uneducated. And as far as she was concerned, if I can make it through school, that's good, fine and good. If I can't, that's fine and good too. Go get a job, be a clerk somewhere. And it was really on that basis that my mom was not what you would call the tiger mom these days. Right? Never had tuition, and she left me pretty much to myself. And when I took my preliminary exams in O-levels, secondary 4, I had the worst possible results that you can get short of failing. I had C6 for everything. I was completely C level. I had, for my best 5 subjects, I had 30 points, which today would, you get nowhere. And so when I came home with the results, and then my mom asked me, I said, I passed everything. But then she said, but I don't think I'm going to get further into pre-university or whatever. Then she said, oh, that's fine. Not to worry. Just go get a job. And I was like, you mean I got to work? And so over the next 6 weeks or so, when I studied really hard, and I came out, well, not exactly straight A's, but well enough to get me into junior college. But then you don't get this aha moment and change your life in one go, right? So I did exactly the same thing. And I had 4 E's for my A-levels. And then I got my A-level results. I went home to my mother. And then my mom asked me, how did you do? And that was, I think, the first inkling that I may have a career as a lawyer. Because I looked her straight in the eye and told her, Mom, I got a full cert. I passed everything, which is literally true, but So, yeah, and then, oh, good. But then I realized that, look, that there's only that far that BS can get you. And then there was when I went for that talk by Professor Woon, and I was like, oh, wow, maybe I might take a shot at trying to be a lawyer. And so I changed all my subjects. I was going out with this girl who was doing all the arts combinations at that time, because I was a technical student, as I told you. So there was no hope in being an engineer. So just spent quality time with my beloved at that time. And so I retook my A-levels on literature, history, blah, blah, blah. She was my tutor. Unfortunately, the beloved and I, we had a falling out because I did very well and she didn't do well at all. I think she kind of blamed me, and then she broke up with me. And yeah, I haven't seen her, although I do think about her. It's been 40 years and wonder where she is. But there you have it. So yeah, it wasn't this positive trajectory. This is what I want to do in life. It was like, oh, this is what I didn't want to do in life. And it's like, okay, if I don't want to be a clerk, and how do I extend my school holiday? And that's how I stumbled into law.
Well, I think this is a good lesson for young Singaporeans who certainly I've met recently who all have straight A's in everything all the way through. But I like the way that you recognize that your future as an engineer was not going to be bright and sparkly. And you switched to arts, but you did very well in arts and managed to get yourself into NUS to do law. So you must have some brains up there for sure.
Very lazy, and then it needs to be driven by fear. The fear of going out to work.
It's great though, isn't it, to hear that despite those initial A-level grades, your full house, as it were, you were able to resit those. This time of year, it's a very intense time for young people sitting their exams. And I think it's so important that we want to emphasize how even if you don't get the grades that you really wanted, it is not the end of the world by any means.
Absolutely.
You can always resit them. You can always change course. Maybe the ones that you took were not right for you. And actually you can find your talents elsewhere. So don't give up hope, and make sure that you just dig deep within yourself to find other things that actually may be better suited to you and the way you think and the things that you want to do with your life. So it's lucky that you found all of that out, isn't it?
Yes. I think that just to take up what you said, I think the most important certificate I got from my education was not the O-levels, A-levels, the graduation from university. It was my kindergarten graduation certificate, because that's where I learned to interact and make friends with people. And you learn social skills and life skills. In kindergarten, make friends.
That's right. And what I hear in your story is very much your ability to empathize with others, right? So when you saw the little old lady and her grandson and that feeling of the social injustice and how you can use your skills in the law to help equalize, to really act for those people and to help give them a voice, because you understand their side of the fence. You mentioned the brick wall, how the world is so different for them. They don't understand. She was so distressed. getting this summons, which in the end turned out to be nothing in particular. Like really, if you could understand what it was, you'd be like, oh, I'll just turn up and pay the fine or whatever, move on. But for her, it was huge and really meant a lot that you took the time to see her, right? To actually acknowledge her, ask her what the problem was, help her there, and for her to really feel like somebody, even though a lawyer, could understand her side and wanted to help. And I think so many lawyers go into the profession because they want to help other people. But as we know, in general corporate and all sorts of types of law, you generally end up working for quite sort of faceless corporations.
That's
but
right.
It seems like the criminal aspects of your practice really bring you in touch with some very interesting and very complicated life situations. So I know that there was a very interesting case that you worked on as well. So another situation which was very novel and interesting. Can you tell us about that particular case, the one I'm referring to, and the guy with the skin disease?
Yes. Well, 1994, 1995, this guy literally cut his friend's head off. He was young man, mid-30s. He killed his friend. It was in the 90s. And there were a couple of unusual factors about that because he was an opium addict. At that time, and even rarer these days, opium is an old man's drug. You do not get young people taking opium. And then the other thing was that he came back to Singapore. He killed the guy. He said, look, I never intended to. I lost it. And of course, when the first trial came up, we ran the usual defense and said, look, that there was provocation. The old man cursed his mother, and that he drank a lot of the Chinese wine, which was very, very high alcohol content. Of course, that would never fly. So accordingly, he was convicted and sentenced to death. And then the next thing that happened was that this was the first year where the haze came over from Indonesia. I remember that our haze index hit something like 300. The visibility went down to like 20 meters. And I went to see him in prison. And he was stark naked, strapped to a gurney in an oxygen tent. And the prison guards were in hazmat suits surrounding him. And I was like, what in heaven's name is that, right? Now, I thought that, I've always seen that he's got a bit of a scaly complexion. But I thought it was just a very severe case of shingles. But his outbreak, his whole body was one weeping sore. And even through the oxygen tent, I could smell that there was this slightly sweet, soury smell, which I've never smelled it before. So I asked for a medical report, and he says that he suffered from something called keratosis follicularis, something called Barrier's disease. I had absolutely no idea what it was. This was in the mid-90s. There was no such thing as Google. There was the internet, and internet was largely Usenet groups and chat rooms, etc. And so I went into the dermatology chat room and asked him, look, does anybody know what this thing is about? I have a client charged with murder. Does this disease cause homicidal tendencies? No answer. Now, the morning of his appeal, before the Court of Appeal, let's say it was a Monday morning or something. Now, on Sunday night, I got an email from a doctor in Boston, dermatologist, who says, oh, sorry, I've been on a long fishing holiday. Yeah, no, I don't know of any cases that says that they will cause homicidal rages, but it's a very rare disease. But there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people who suffers from the disease have got some kind of suffers occasional psychotic episodes, and they've been known to kill themselves. Now, it just turned out that this disease was very rare. So it affects 1 in 3 million. So statistically, he was one of 1.5 persons in Singapore with that disease. So what's the chances of that disease causing homicidal rage? So anyway, I printed it out, ran all the way to court, and went before the Chief Justice, the former Chief Justice Yong Pang Hao, and I printed it out on rough paper. Chief Justice Yong says, look, sir, can I have some time to look into this matter? So the Chief Justice was a very proper fellow. He took the paper, printed out, he read it, then he looked around where it was used, and then he looked at it again, and he flipped it over again, and then he looked at me, well, Mr. Wong, it looks like you're quite environmentally friendly. Yes, I think, why don't you just take some time to go and investigate the matter? So I did, and as I said, there was no Google. I didn't know any doctors at that stage, and so I had my dentist to help me do the medical research because I didn't know how to work the medical library to do the research. And because it was such a rare disease, they've never really done a big study. But be that as it may, got enough evidence to say, look, there may be something there. Let's apply for a retrial. So there was a retrial, and along the way, I made friends with two psychiatrists who came on board voluntarily as experts, as defense experts. And we had a retrial. I was originally given 3 days for it. Eventually, I think it lasted 8 or 11 days. And as God being great, by the time the retrial came on, the internet was sufficiently mature that the results of the Human Genome Project was available on the internet. And there it was. They mapped that particular portion of the human genome where this disease affects, and it says, okay, it affects certain markers or something. And it just so happened that people who suffer from a condition called organic psychosis, there's an organic basis for your psychopathic behavior. And it turns out that there are about 21 markers or so, and 17 of these co-locates with this particular disease. Because the skin is a genetic disease. And so when the skin together with the brain, it is part of the same group of stem cells that develop, and so it gets affected. Not only the brain, but also the skin. We had a titanic fight in court over that. And eventually the High Court judge agreed with me, yes, on the balance of probability, that he did have a psychotic outbreak at that point in time because he was taking a lot of opium. Why was he drinking all that Chinese wine? Because it was basically his own self-medication to manage the symptoms that was coming on to him because he was having this horrible outbreak again whenever it comes out. And then it's really itchy and it causes him to lose control. So I went up to Malaysia, got his wife, got his childhood friends, all of whom came to court to testify to say, yes, he's got this disease all along, and that when we know how to identify it, we leave him to himself and we isolate him so that when he's in this mania, he doesn't hurt himself, doesn't hurt other people. Yeah, so it was the evidence, literally, because why did he come back? Because he said he felt really bad about it. He was my friend. I didn't intend to kill him. So if in the absence of a motive, and motives generally in murder cases tend to be, it's either about money or about sex or love, depending on how you look at it. So if there's absence of motive, then you question what could have caused it. The law here requires intention to kill, but if in the absence of a motive, what gives rise to the intention? So yeah, so that was, I would still consider that to be my greatest triumph ever. Because he was from the gallows, he was sentenced to 20 years. He was arrested in 1994. He served 13 years or so. And he was released in 2012, 2013. Gave me a call, came to visit me and say thank you. And then he's gone home and back to his hometown in Malaysia.
Amazing, an amazing case, and so much involved in terms of a few lucky breaks in terms of the timing and
That's right. And that's why this may sound very hokey, but I believe that there's a very small and silent voice of God speaking because these coincidences.
Yeah. Sounds like there were lots of coincidences. And there were coincidences in the interesting case of Mr. Bay Chu Bu. So this one is a very exciting case. So tell us a little bit about the circumstances, why this man ended up on death row in the first place.
Well, in the old days, before COVID, tens of thousands of Malaysians coming over into Singapore on their motorcycles. And so you get a lot of drugs coming in that way. So he came into Singapore on a borrowed motorcycle, and the drugs were found in the motorcycle. His fingerprints were not there, but because he was in control of the motorcycle, there are presumptions in the law about that. And so the onus is then thrown onto him and therefore onto us to prove that he didn't know that the drugs were there, right? And so essentially, we had to find out why he was here in Singapore in the first place. He says, well, I'm here to return my power bank to my friend. And the friend, of course, said, look, I know nothing about this. But when we actually eventually managed to get him into court, I asked him, right, did you know that he was coming? The friend said there was a job for him the following day. But the friend disavowed it completely because the friend runs a little moving company. Bay was a mover, and he was going to employ Bay illegally. So he was going to get into trouble. So because of everything that happened with Bay, he was asked to go to CNB to help with the investigation and was detained for a couple of days. That job the following day went south. It had so much trouble. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. So there was a bit of a drama moment in court when he turned around to Bay and said, "Look, you're my friend. I'm sorry, but please understand why I did that." This is one of those TV moments, right, where the witness actually fessed up. But that cut no ice with the judge, which is, in final analysis, not wrong, because Bay could have been coming in to talk to his friend about to return the power bank and to talk about the job the following day. But at the same time, he could be in to deliver drugs. Now, it turned out that the friend from whom he borrowed the motorcycle happened to be in Singapore. We know who he is. He was arrested a year later, coming into Singapore on another motorbike with a stash of drugs. And he's serving 10 years for drug trafficking. So I wrote to him to prison to interview him, radio silence, wrote another letter, radio silence, wrote a third letter, and then to which I got a response where it says, "Dear Mr. Wong, I understand that you want to speak to me. I am sorry, but I am not free. I'm very busy." I'm going to frame this up. The man is serving 10 years in jail, right? And he didn't want to come, he didn't want to talk to me. So that's fine. So we issued a subpoena for him. And then we went on for the trial. Actually, the prosecution offered the friend as a defense witness. And the prosecution then, of course, put all sorts of things to Bay. And the last question that the prosecutor asked Bay was this. "I put it to you that you are working for this fellow Ah Siang," to which Bay denied. And then suddenly, it was like 4:45 in the afternoon, and suddenly the scales fell from my eyes, because suddenly I realized that there was a tactical game that the prosecution was playing with me. And I didn't look carefully at the horse's mouth, right, to see whether teeth are all there. And suddenly I realized that there were not teeth in there, but there were fangs. Because if I had called him, this ASEAN fellow, as my witness, he would definitely not cooperate with me. And he will not agree with my version of the story. So I would have to then impeach him and try to discredit him, etc., etc. And you don't do that with your own witness. On the other hand, the prosecution would have free run. They can put all kinds of things to him, whether true or not. And then when I realized that this was the game that the prosecution was playing, I yanked the handbrakes, and I could literally hear the screeching of the tires behind me. And I was like, oh God, I was 1 foot off the cliff. All right. And I pulled back and said, look, I'm not going to call him. And so that was a turning point, because then the question then would be this. Bay had already said right from the beginning, "I don't know where the drugs were from. Now, you should ask my friend ASEAN." Now, the interesting thing about this was that none of the CNB officers remembered him saying this. But there was an interpreter from the ICA who came forward and said, when I asked him, "Did you remember him mentioning this name?" And he said, "Yes, I do. He did say it." And so it put an entirely different complexion on things, because the prosecution's case was that Bay was making up this story about ASEAN only about 3 days after he was arrested. But the ICA interpreter's version, when he recounted what Bay said, it establishes that it was something that he said right from the beginning. It's not something that he cooked up a couple of days later. So on that basis, you can call it getting him off on a technicality. But that's what the criminal procedure is like, Who bears the burden of proof? Do I have to prove that he is innocent, or does the prosecution have to prove that he is guilty? Well, what was par for the course. But fortunately, again, as it was late in the afternoon, everybody was tired and sleepy. But somehow I heard that question, and the scales fell from my eyes. So the High Court judge found him guilty and sentenced him to death. When we went before the Court of Appeal had a couple of raised eyebrow moments. I said, look, you told the prosecution you can't do this.
Yeah, it was amazing. But tell us a bit about your relationship with Bay, because it was pretty amazing in terms of even though he was initially sentenced to death, you then went to appeal. But during that time, he maintained quite an optimistic outlook, didn't he?
Oh, yes. Because I think that was because I created for him what's called an empowering context. He was really peeved about it, because to this day, he still gets worked up about it. It was like saying, oh no, then that judge, why did he could have done it a week before, he could have done it a week after. Why did he have to do it on Chinese New Year's Eve? Take me out of jail, sentence me to death on Chinese New Year's Eve. And so I created for him what I call an empowering context. I said, look, don't think of this as a bad thing in itself. Just think of it as the last bad thing to happen to you this year. Next year is a new year, right? So we laughed about it. We mentioned, get some humor into it, and we laughed about it. I asked him, said, look, do you still want me to defend you? And he said, yes, yeah, I do. So we continued, and things came out the way it did. Now, so we had the appeal in October. We were actually quite optimistic because of the questioning that the Court of Appeal had for the prosecutor. But then the Court of Appeal then reserved judgment, and that was in October. So I thought it might be done and dusted in a couple of weeks. Then it didn't. Deepavali came and went. Christmas came and went. And then after it was New Year, 2021. So one day he then asked me, Mr. Wong, look, I'm still sitting here. Do you think we can get a day pass out for Chinese New Year? I said, oh, okay. Well, I don't think so. But ask is for free. Let me ask the prisons. I expect the answer to be no, but yes, I'll ask them for you. And so not unexpectedly, they say no. Then in the meantime, I asked the prosecution, so we can offer him bail, but it says, he's got no family here. He's got no money. And we're in the middle of a lockdown. Where are we going to put him? That's unworkable. So, okay, last resort, and said, I wrote to the Court of Appeal, says, can I bring him out? And for just for a couple of days, just for Chinese New Year. And surprised, the Court of Appeal came back and said, yes, you may, but subject to some conditions. And the Attorney General's chambers then gave a whole long laundry list of conditions, including one condition that Mr. Wong Shil Hong shall personally ensure that the appellant, Mr. Bey Chiu Bu, will not be returned to prison in an intoxicated state. So anyway, it was a life-changing experience because for 3 days, I took him out. We walked around. We went to the temples. We went to basically let him breathe fresh air. And it's never happened before. It's never going to happen again. Right? Because a lot of lawyers, a lot of other inmates wrote to me and asked or called me and said, can I get a day pass through? I said, no, it's not going to happen. It just so happened that it was this particular instance. It's unique circumstances, but there you have it. But it was very touching because the first thing I got him out and we did was that, what do you want? I want a Coke. And I said, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. You want to have Coke. And he said, Mr. Wong, I've been in there for 4.5, 5 years. I have not had a taste of Coke. You can have it anytime you want. I can't. I thought, okay, fine. I brought him a Coke. And there was this look of utter joy on his face, which there's a photo of him. It was published in one of the Malaysian photos. There was this total bliss that he was holding on to a proper sandwich and a Coke. And then, I gave him my phone and he called his family back in Malaysia. And they come from a very poor family, not particularly educated. And so I saw from behind because I was getting a drink. And his sister was there, was half awake. And she looked at him without saying a word. And just tears just came. And after about a minute or two, she just said, oh God, I never expected that I would see you in this life again. That was really such a touching moment. It's humanity because this is a man's life. Because the court has accepted that it was just pure bad luck that he borrowed his friend's bike and his friend had forgotten that the drugs were in there and he was arrested with it. But it took so much just to prove that it was an accident. The second day, took him out. Where do you want to go now? He said, I want to go and visit my cellmate's mother. And she was in her 90s, little old lady with a ventilator. And she was crying. And he said to her, Auntie, don't cry. As long as there's breath in our body, there is hope. 1 year and 1 day ago, I was sentenced to death. Who would have expected, who would have believed that today I would be out? I can come and visit you and pay my respects for Chinese New Year. So you mustn't give up hope. Again, it may be hokey, but when you're in your 90s, your son is in death row, is on trial for his life. What is there but hope? So basically, I asked him, that was when we were leaving, I was like, that was a really good one. You can become in motivational speakers. And he said, no, thanks to you, Mr. Wong, because you told me last year, this is the last bad thing to happen to me this year. Next year is a good year. This year is now next year. And it is a good year. It will be a good year. So I wanted to share that hope, because what you said to me gave me hope. And I wanted to share that hope with the old lady. So yeah, not well educated, but very high EQ. So eventually he was released. That in itself was another adventure, because although he was given his liberty, but at the point of his release, he was at liberty to go anywhere he wants in Singapore that doesn't require money and don't require a handphone with either your trace together token or a safe entry. So effectively, he couldn't do anything. Right. And so he gets his papers, traveling papers. I had to, find a hotel to put him up in. I had to stock him up with provisions because I was afraid that he's going to wander around. And he's not been socialized. He doesn't know the rules. And next thing you know, he could very well be arrested for breaking this COVID thing. And so, yes, it's funny how you get out of jail for drug trafficking, but then you get arrested for breaking the COVID regulations. So anyway, we had to take care of all that. And I think the Chief Justice knew about that, because he was asking me when he was like, well, yes, he shall be released. Anything else, Mr. Wong? And I looked at him, Your Honor, heaps, but nothing for this court to do. I'll take care of the rest of it. Good. And the court ended. And that was the end of that particular legal adventure. When the rest of it was like, oh God, it was one of the hardest couple of weeks in my life, because I had to look after him. Because insofar as my legal duties are concerned, I brought him out and he can go home. But the thing is that it's not complete until, under the circumstances, I put him onto a plane. His backside is on the seat. And then after that, there's nothing else I could do for him. So, and that's where it ended. So he went home. He got a bit of a raucous welcome. He became, a bit of a cause celeb for a couple of days or weeks. And, well, he's now applying for government grant to start a fish farm. So he's trying to get back the lost 5 years of his life. Yep, that's a very abbreviated version, because I could easily go on for another half an hour, 45 minutes, and we are already well past the hour. It's a very long chat.
Exactly. So I know that our listeners will have been fascinated by your story, which is why I didn't want to cut it short. But I think that we must we must unfortunately end here. But anybody who wants to reach out to you, where would be the best place for them to find you?
Well, look for my name on the LinkedIn. Just get onto the net. Just Wong Siu Hong Lawyer, and my contacts are there.
I will put links in the show notes so people can reach you. You are amazing in terms of going really above and beyond in terms of the ultimate lawyer for their client. I think that people would agree that having you on their side is definitely what we will always want in the worst circumstances.
Well, the big caveat there is that, look, I can't walk on water. I don't work miracles, right? But yeah, I try my best. I may not succeed, but I will try my best.
And that's all anyone can ask. So thank you. Thank you so much, Siu Hong, for telling your story today.
You're most welcome, yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Genie podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate and review it on Apple Podcasts to help me reach more listeners. If you are a lawyer who is stuck, but you're motivated to try and move forward, why not book a 30-minute no-obligation chemistry session to see if I could be the coach for you? You can book an appointment through my website at laraqassociates.com. The link is in the show notes.